The video you're about to see, the interview you're about to see, is, in my humble opinion, one of the most fascinating I have ever had the pleasure of being involved in and with. Not me, but my guest and my friend, Dr. Erik Thaddeus Walters. A man of immense, colossal knowledge, sobriety, and I use that in the serious tone regarding one of the most fascinating cases, filled with intrigue, labyrinthine conspiracies. I mean, it is like Mandelbrot's fractals. You keep getting closer and closer and deeper, and there's more there. I want to say one thing before we begin this. This is not in any way Catholic bashing. This is not about the theology, the liturgy of the faith. Has nothing to do with this. This is the oldest, in essence, non-hereditary monarchical theocracy in the history of the world. This isn't just some religious internecine battle among Catholics. This is bigger than anything you've seen. And the final word is, this goes to show you yet again how, as is often the case, when something so great and so grand becomes made aware to the people, whether it's assassination theories or corruption, Americans and people think that there must be some tribunal that will jump in and correct it, that says, hey, wait a minute, you can't do this. Wrong. Yet again, it goes to show you how so much can go wrong. Unaffected, unavoided, unaltered. That is exactly what we're talking about. So, my friend, I thank you for watching this. Sit back and get ready for one of the most fascinating. And by the way, this is a follow-up to a prior interview we did, and I'm going to have that link as well. For those of you who think you know about the papacy or the Catholic Church or Benedict or Bergoglio or Ratzinger, get ready for this. Get ready to be mesmerized. The reaction to this gentleman was like nothing I have ever seen in my years. Dr. Erik Thaddeus Walters, professor, il professore, maester, the one and the only, joined us to give us a kind of a bird's eye or Vatican's eye view of Bergoglio, Prince, oh my God, maybe there was a pun, Pope Francis's demise, what happens next. And Professor Walters, welcome back. And I want to just say a preface. This is not Catholic bashing. This is not, in fact, it's anything but. This is an historical news review of the realities of a transition which affects the world and not necessarily just Catholics. So lest anyone thinks we're getting into digs or talking about either the theology or the Eucharist or the liturgy or no. This is about a quasi, dare I say, governmental transition process. Would that be fair, Erik? Is this almost like quasi-governmental?
This is revolutionary. Oh, we'll get to that. It's beyond that. This is the end of an epic.
Okay, tell us, and just one last word. Don't let me ask the question. I don't know anything. I am nescient regarding this. Tell me what we should know, what insiders know, what Romans know, what your colleagues, what the insiders know. Proceed, sir.
Okay. So once again, I came up with a little outline. There's a lot to cover because I'm glad that the audience the last time enjoyed it.
Wow.
I personally went through all the comments and I was very appreciative of them, and a lot of interesting follow-up questions that people had. So there's no way we're going to be able to go through everything. So I'm trying to keep this limited to a few things. And maybe not to be salacious, but already
Please.
off the bat, a few interesting things that I actually did want to mention last time, but just we didn't have time. So the premier biographer of Pope Benedict XVI, the German journalist Peter Seewald, and you can, and it's in English translation. I think it's the English translation is Final Conversations from 2016, and there's a lot of one-liners and takeaways. So it's in an interview format with Pope Benedict XVI, pretty much the last interview he ever gave, or at least published. One takeaway line is the interviewer, the author Peter Seewald, asks him, and this is going on in the what's called the monastery Mater Ecclesiae in the Vatican Gardens overlooking St. Peter's Basilica and the Sistine Chapel, which is where he spent the last 10 years of his life. Also bear in mind, Benedict, all the spin they put out immediately following his resignation, which was not a resignation, as we explained last time.
Right.
And the election of Bergoglio. Part of the spin was, Benedict is frail, he's sick, he's ill. Well, for being so sick, frail, and ill, he spent more than half of his pontificate in an impeded see. 9 years
What does
is
that
actually
mean?
the impeded see. Again, he's a prisoner either of an external force or an internal force, in this case, internal within the church itself.
And I'm sorry, not to interrupt, but somebody might say SEE, the Holy See, the impeded see. What is the SEE for laymen and myself?
Sure. It's where we get the English word seat from. There's a difference in Latin between a cathedra, from which we get the word cathedral. Cathedra meaning the chair of the magister, the teacher in the classroom, or the magistrate in the courtroom. In this case, the chair of Peter, meaning the Pope. Okay, so there's a difference though in Latin between a CSEE, in Latin sedes, meaning a generic chair, it could be any kind of a chair, and the cathedra is unique, specific, that chair to these roles.
Okay.
In any event, the interviewer, Peter Seewald, asks Pope Benedict XVI, who was Pope for 10 years, well, he's Pope for longer in an impeded see as prisoner than he was actually doing Pope. So much for that. 10 years he was in an impeded see. And the interviewer asks him at a certain point, are you going to be the last Pope? And Pope Benedict XVI responds, quite frankly, he says, anything is possible. So that's one thing. The other thing is
I'm sorry, not to, please, just impeded see, when Pope Benedict Ratzinger, the predecessor of Bergoglio, Francis, impeded see, meaning you are before transition or before, does that mean his papacy was illegitimate? It was a nullity, it was vacant, it was void, it was with an asterisk, so that we understand what was his status?
He was usurped. His cathedra, his chair, his throne was usurped. I mean, to put it, maybe
coup. It's like a coup d'état.
It's a coup d'état, and then you have an imposter, a usurper, come in to just claim it. Just like kind of a Shakespearean drama, tragedy, or whatever.
So it would be, in essence, you have this imposter who came in and told the world, I am, and nobody, the white smoke, all of that, nobody spoke up, or did they? Everybody knew this.
There were high-ranking prelates at the time, both bishops and cardinals, not a lot, maybe half a dozen or so, who did publicly make statements to this point and to the effect that he was usurped. It was a coup d'état. but nothing formally on the part of those who could have and should have done something, namely the pre-2013 elected cardinals. That is, cardinals created by either Pope John Paul II or Pope Benedict XVI.
And again, not to, I'm violating my own rules here. The Pope Benedict Ratzinger did not die, did not, quote, step down. Can that be done? How is a papacy, how is the secession or the terminus of a papacy, how is that accomplished, thus allowing a vacancy and then the re-election? Is that even possible? Can you do that without a pope being dead?
Well, only unless either the Pope has to die,
Mm-hmm.
or the Pope has to properly abdicate, resign the office of being Pope, which in Latin is called munus, M-U-N-U-S, munus. And Benedict did not do that.
Okay, interesting. So he and again, all of this is done, and nobody is saying, "Hey, wait a minute." Here in this thing, if somebody tried to do that with Pope or even listen to Pope Trump or Biden, they would have been screaming, "You can't do this!" It would have been constitutional scholars.
Yeah.
It was done under the radar with a tacit say nothing. That's the part that blows my mind and others as well. They say, Erik, this can't be. You just don't go out there, and nobody in St. Peter's Square says, "Hey, hold it." Not one person, nobody on television, not our Cardinal Dolan, nobody, not did Vigano or any of the other heretics say, who complained about this?
Well, those that did complain, there were very few that did it for the correct reasons.
Okay.
There were others, many, Vigano, I think, could be placed in that category, that did it for seemingly other and unproductive and counterproductive and perhaps personal interest reasons.
Grudges, axes to grind, animus, whatever. Okay. Forgive me. Proceed, sir.
It's okay. So that's one thing. Another thing is when Benedict again did the Declaratio, and in the aftermath, and again repeated to the journalist Peter Saywald, who I mentioned earlier, he also mentioned, if anyone vaguely recalls when this all happened in February and March of 2013, the first pope to resign in 593 years or something like that. No. Benedict said that what I'm doing has not happened in over 1,000 years. And he was referring specifically to the year 1013.
Wow.
And his predecessor, who did abdicate, but also for forced reasons, by the Holy Roman Empire at the time. This is in the year 1013.
Wow. And who was that, pray tell?
Well, rather ironically, if not providentially, Pope Benedict XVIII, half of 16. Yeah.
Oh, cue the theremin. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally, in this kind of more, just the salacious part, I guess, if you will, Archbishop Gainsfine, whom I mentioned also last time, Pope Benedict XVI's personal secretary, now Archbishop, he's done a lot of public appearances. He's very careful and measured with his words, but to his credit, just last year, 2024, he was giving a conference in a church in the north of Italy. And he said to everyone, there's a few hundred people there, I guess, in the church, that what Benedict did is not what the world thinks, meaning implying resign. Yeah.
This cryptic, these measured, almost like read between the lines. I think we had joked about Jeremiah Denton, the POW, who was blinking torture when he was. It's as though he is the person, the woman at the door, when the police officer comes and says, "Everything all right?" And they open the door and there's a chain and she's trying to say, "No, everything's fine. So there are these signals, and you understood it. How many of your, if I walked around with you and talked to your colleagues and friends and those in the know, how many of you would say, "Oh, absolutely, of course that is, of course that's true"?
A lot.
Wow.
The problem is everything happened so fast, just, I mean, warp speed, to wrap your head around it and to figure out what was happening in the first place, again, analytically, accurately, it took a little time and it kept taking time. And then, there are questions posed to prelates, and it's just they avoid it. They don't want to know, nothing to see or move along kind of thing. But now it's gotten a fever pitch in Italy.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
That's what I want to know. Because as you can imagine here,
no, it's a fever pitch.
Nobody's saying, okay, wow.
If you remember, if you remember the Italian journalist I mentioned last time, Andrea Ciolci, he's filed several petitions. He actually received in return from the Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin, who just had I think a heart attack a few days ago. I was very cordial, thanking him for his solicitation. So there's been many petitions, etc., signed by thousands and thousands of people, sent to the Secretary of State in the Vatican, the Holy See, to address specifically all of these matters, and basically saying, you need to do what we discussed last time. You need to declare the Pope is truly dead, go into conclave with only the pre-2013 cardinals, 27, 28. I'll explain why there's a question mark over that number exactly in a moment. And do what you know you need to do. Again, some of the other canons we didn't go into last time also have to do with the cardinals have the obligation and duty to do this. That is, they can't just brush it under the rug. I mean,
and the Pope is dead would be Bergoglio or Ratzinger?
Ratzinger, yeah. Bergoglio is an anti-Pope. He's nothing.
So his death, after his death, and I'm so sorry, I'm a dunce here, but after Ratzinger died in exile, in Elba, so to speak, after he died, you could have corrected it then by saying, all right, let us take this corrective measure here. Say the Pope is dead, pick up where we left off, even after Bergoglio was already Pope, could they have somehow fixed it, corrected that glitch? Because they didn't. Am I reading this right? I mean, or is that just forever?
We've been stuck in this situation since March 1st, 2013.
20 what, please?
2013.
Wow.
21. So that's over 12 years.
Yeah.
And the amount of years would not be so. This may actually be the longest time. I think it is the longest time such a situation has ever occurred. But there's been several moments, in the history of the Catholic Church where same or similar situations have occurred. Several years without Pope. Again, what makes this unique is this is the first time this was actually a successful coup d'état, color revolution within the church, and a usurper cognizant of very completely knowing what they were doing.
Okay. So continue. I'm sorry, sir. I'm interrupting.
So there's been a couple since we last did this, which was, I guess, about a little over 10 days ago. There's been a couple of developments. One is not really a development, it's already known. I didn't mention it. Under, again, Canon Law, the apostolic Canon Law from 1983, the Apostolic Constitution, University of Vienna from 1996, and then including a motu proprio in Latin, which means in my own way, but it's like an executive order on the part of the Pope. That was under Paul VI in the 1970s. I forget which specific year. Adding to this, establishing the number of legal, licit, legitimate cardinal electors in the College of Cardinals at 120. Can't have any more than 120. You can have as little as 3, because it's just a 2/3 majority required to validly or legally elect the Pope, but no more than 120. And they were always very careful since then, Paul VI, 1970s, all the way through Benedict XVI, to never put in more potential cardinal electors than 120 in the cardinal college
And
of cardinals.
today, how many are there? How many are there?
There's a problem, big problem. This by itself, again, according to canon law,
Right.
will nullify the conclave, which is supposed to begin in 3 days.
How many are there now?
There's there's over 200 total cardinals.
Wait a minute. Now stop.
Hold on, wait. Several scores of which are over the age of 80, and so we know they're not going to be voting. Okay. But there's 135 of voting age, so they're 15 over the limit.
Wow.
So number one, if all 135 go into the Sistine Chapel, as per church law itself, null and void. That's number one. Number two, if even just one post 2013 cardinal, meaning a cardinal created by Bergoglio, even if just one out of 108, so he's created a total of 108, 75% of the College of Cardinals, even though not one of them is a legitimate legal cardinal, and they face actually sanctions on the part of the Holy See, like serious prison time, if anyone does what they're supposed to do about them.
Prison?
Yeah, potentially, theoretically, serious sanctions. I mean, they could be, it could be commuted,
Right.
to something else, but they're stripped of everything. I mean, they risk laicization. So, among other things. So, even if just one of those 108 Bergoglian cardinals created under, aka Pope Francis, anti-Pope Francis, even if just one of them sets foot in conclave, the conclave is null and void. Once again, it's an illegal, illegitimate conclave. It can only be the pre-2013 cardinals created by Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI, of which there's 27 or 28. Why 27 or 28? Well, this is a development that happened, and this is like something out of a. I'm doing my best to be very careful and measured here, and not. You just imagine your favorite mafia movie. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
So
I understand. Yeah.
there's a Sardinian cardinal, last name Becciu, and he was created by Bergoglio anyway in the first place. Well, he took the place of the Australian Cardinal Pell, whom Bergoglio put in charge of basically the new entity responsible for cleaning up IOR, IOR, the Istituto per le Opere Religiose, or the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the Vatican Bank. It's usually euphemistically referred to. Okay. Cardinal Pell, the Australian who died a few years ago, also in interesting circumstances, we'll just say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He took the place of the guy before him that was in charge of this, put in charge of this by Pope Benedict XVI, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò.
Wow.
Who was doing his job and doing a good job. And that's one of the reasons, well, maybe we'll come back to that. That's one of the reasons why then he was sent as the apostolic nuncio to the United States in Washington, D.C., basically the Vatican, the Holy See's ambassador to the United States of America, because they were already being forced and pressured. Pope Benedict XVI was losing a lot of support, and wiggle room, he couldn't. He was becoming more and more confined already. Again, this is all leading up to his declaration in February of 2013. So suddenly I just lost my own thought. Oh, so Becciu, this guy, after Bergoglio died, I think it was right the day we did the previous interview,
Right.
or maybe the day after, he meets with the guy that just had the heart attack a few days ago, the Cardinal Secretary of State, Parolin. Parolin gives him a handwritten letter. It was typed out, but
Right.
it says basically it's a declaration. It says that this Cardinal Becciu, who had already been relieved of command, and for a while he was also relieved of any cardinalatial prerogatives, but then Bergoglio reinstated them. There's a lot of backroom deals that go on here. But he was relieved of his command from, investigating the transparency and financial activities of the Vatican Bank, the IOR. And so last week he says so Parolin shows him his letter in which supposedly Bergoglio had written. It says, "You're not allowed to vote in conclave." Signed F.
Right.
So not even his full name, Francis, just F.
F.
There's no date on it.
Wow.
And this Cardinal Becciu says to Parolin, there's a witness, the other people there, says, this is not legal. This is not legal. This is not listed. This is not valid. I'm not respecting this. Now what are you going to do? And now suddenly, a few days ago, Parolin just had a heart attack or severe health problem. I don't remember what exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, that's high drama here.
Now let me stop for a second. Just stop. Okay, to work. The only, according to what you're saying, let me stop. Only 120 eligible cardinals are able to vote. Now you could have more who are 90, 100, but you up to the age of 80, you cannot vote after 80. You can remain your cardinalship or whatever the particular noun is.
Oh yeah,
but you could stay on. You could have 500 if you want, but only the ones after 80 you stop voting. I did not know.
You cannot vote. You lose your
120 were there from Ratzinger, from a Benedict, and then J.P. Deuce, right? Those two. They were the only one. Anyone after that, any cardinal appointed theoretically by Francis doesn't count. So the only ones who can vote, and you can have a minimum, we say a quorum, if you will, a minimum of 3, and no more than 120 voting. They could be, and they can't be in the room, correct? You can only have 120. So let's say there's 200 total. The other 80 cannot be in that conclave. It can only be a 120 bona fide, certified, legitimate, authorized cardinals who can vote. And you say right now, of that 120, there's about 135 who are attempting to vote.
135. So that's already 135. Yeah. They're 15 over the limit anyway.
Right.
Moreover, and moreover, 108 were all created by Bergoglio. Wow. This is also unprecedented history. He's the guy that's created the most cardinals in history who are not cardinals because he was not the Pope. But anyway.
So we have 27, right? My math, roughly about 27 or 28, you said, who can actually vote.
Yeah.
And if you walked into the, and by the way, if you had in that conclave any more than that 27 or 28 who were able to vote, does that nullify the validity of the conclave as well?
Out of 108 Bergoglian cardinals, even if just one of them sets foot in the conclave is ab initio de facto null and void.
Right. Yeah. Now, if I were to ask, theoretically, everybody in Rome or anybody who is conversant with the papacy rules to say, how many of you have heard this or know this? How many people would honestly say, yep, we know all about that. We're not saying anything, but Erik Thaddeus Walters is 100% correct. How many do you think roughly would acknowledge this?
Of those who care?
Yes and no, correct.
Yeah. I would say
all of them.
more than 50%.
Wow.
And the other remaining percentage of whatever that would be are what some might characterize as gatekeepers, whether they're in the media.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So where do we go now? And what happens?
Yeah. So I'll keep calling it an illegitimate, illegal conclave because no one's done anything yet about it. begins on this Wednesday, May 7th, in the morning. And so what will happen is in St. Peter's Basilica, there will be a mass, and then they will, well, then and all the cardinals will be there present for that. So that's over 200. And then if 135 go into the Sistine Chapel, conclave null and void. But they'll do what they usually do. They'll do the rounds of voting called scrutini. There's a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon. And they do that for 5 days in a row. And if they don't come up with anyone on the fifth day, then they take another few days off to, I don't know, get in touch with the Holy Spirit or something. And then they go back into conclave again for more rounds of voting. Now that's not happened in, I don't remember when the last time, a long time. I mean, the last several elections have been done historically relatively quickly, anywhere from 1 to a few days, and not even a full 5 days. So that starts on Wednesday morning. But as I said, if those 135, just one of the Bergoglian cardinals goes in, it's another illegal and illegitimate conclave. Okay. And so whoever, and in the meantime, there could be fireworks. In other words, it could happen in the Sistine Chapel.
Right.
You know, a proper drop down, what do you call it? Drop down, drag out fight.
Right. Knock down, drag out. Yeah. Yep.
Knock down, drag out, yeah. You know, who knows? So
now a couple of questions here. First, you mentioned before somebody could be imprisoned, or who, because the first thing, Eric, people might be saying is, oh, this is just some internecine battle of Catholics. Who cares? Doesn't affect anything. It's a bunch of people in dresses and funny hats and pink shoes and red shoes. And so what? It's bigger than that. This is not just about a Catholic church. It is about, what would you call it? Almost like it's almost like ancillary to the monarchy. It's to me, there's no, explain that significance of what the papacy means.
Yeah. So the papacy, to put it in those kind of governmental political terms, is the world's only, non-hereditary, elected, absolute theocratic monarchy, the king of which is the Pope.
Interesting. Theocratic monarchy, right.
Yeah. Non-hereditary, although there is nepotism, for example, in the Renaissance period, the Borgia. Okay.
And there's monarchical. For example, one could argue that Iran, for example, people say, well, that's a theocracy or something. But that's not hereditary. That's almost dare I say, a democratic theocracy. You're voted or.
Yeah. I lost.
This is a different story altogether. So that's number one. Number two, what is the judicial review, if you will, process? If the Pope is infallible, the Pope is like the Supreme Court. Whatever the Pope says is ipso facto, by its very nature, correct. End of discussion. Do you think that anyone could actually bring this up? Has there been any kind of a civil war, or anybody who told the Pope you're doing something wrong, or
oh yeah, over history, sure.
Is it successful? Is there a tribunal that could overrule the Pope?
Yeah, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I know I don't want to get too lost in these are all important, profound, deep, and fascinating and time-consuming questions. That's why it's so complicated,
right?
To wrap one's head around one. Most recently it was the First Vatican Council, 1869 to 1870, when Pope Pius IX, the Church's longest reigning pope ever, 33 years, it was under him the Papal States collapsed into what we know today as Vatican City State. He issued what's called the dogma of papal infallibility. When the Pope speaks ex cathedra from the Pope's throne, he's infallible in matters of faith and morals.
Right.
And morals is an unfortunate and really inaccurate translation from the Latin mores, because mores is much more encompassing. It doesn't just mean ethical behavior. It means customs and traditions and all sorts of things. And if anyone, if you're any in your audience has ever heard of Lord Dalberg Acton, Lord Acton, I think there's an institute is named after him.
All power corrupts.
He's the guy that, at least in the modern period, coined that phrase.
Right.
All power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
He uttered those words to Pope Pius IX's face in December of 1870.
Wow.
Trying to get him not to make this a dogma. Yeah. So
now a little background. My understanding, my pedestrian understanding, is that Mussolini and the Vatican under Pius XI formed some kind of an alliance, the Lateran Treaty of 1929, and because I find this interesting, like Mussolini also. Italy is with Libya and this, because we in the United States, as you know, being from here, we're used to, we've been here, we've added on, but we don't have any serious questions as to how Arizona came about or who owns it. So this is almost like Harry Potterish. What's that about, Mussolini and the Vatican?
So I don't want to bore people with.
You cannot bore anybody. It's impossible for you to bore anybody.
Okay, so the Vatican is the world's oldest, continuously still surviving nation state of any kind. It was formally established in the year 754 between Pope Stephen II and the barbarian chieftain of the Merovingians at the time, a guy named Pepin, or Pepin the Short, not to be confused with his relative Pepin the Fat. So the barbarian chieftain of the Merovingians, whom the previous pope, or the Pope invited to invade the Italian peninsula to subdue two other barbarian groups, the Ostrogoths and the Lombards. Okay. They accomplished this successfully in 754, and that's when the Papal States begin, the sovereign temporal monarchical rulers of which are the popes. It's also when European nobility begins, because for his part, the Pope grants to Pepin and his two sons, Carloman and Charlemagne, the ancient Roman legal title of nobility, Patricius Romanorum, or patrician of the Romans. So this is when European nobility begins. So if you think about the Barrier guy in England, all that stuff, the Windsors, that's when it formally begins. Always under the Pope. Not because he's not specifically because he's the successor of Peter and the Vicar of Christ, but because he's also the Pontifex Maximus, which we can come back to or not, either now or a later time. It's long. Okay. Anyway, so the Papal States then from that point until 1870 basically cover the central third of the Italian peninsula. Okay. And during the so-called unification of Italy in the 19th century, so for your American listeners, while the U.S. Civil War was going on, there was kind of a civil war going on here, referred to as the unification of Italy. By 1870, the Papal States had been collapsed into what we know today as 44 hectares or 110 acres of land, Vatican City State. And in fact, historians refer to this period between 1870 and 1929, coming to the Lateran Treaty, as the Roman question.
Wow.
What do we do now with this Pope thing? Because, we got a lot of Catholics running around the world. And so 1929, February 11th, the same day Benedict made his declaratio, February 11th, 1929, the Lateran Treaty is signed between Pope Pius XI and the dictator of Italy at the time, Benito Mussolini, establishing Vatican City State with all sorts of provisions for remunerations because of the loss of tax revenue from the Papal States, and all sorts of other legalities. And just things.
See, but that's fascinating because the one thing that we know, and one of the interesting stories which folks I think forget, and I am not by any stretch of the imagination a biblical scholar or historian, but one of the problems that Jesus posed to Pontius Pilate was, who's this guy? We don't like somebody within the confines of our jurisdictions claiming not only allegiance with a bunch of people who can turn against us and some kind of very powerful, if not supernatural. We don't care for this. So Mussolini and others had to realize we have to do something about these folks. Yeah. We have to mollify them, contain them. Right. It's almost like containment theory, like we did with NATO and Soviet Union. So that's something interesting, because if anybody thinks, put it this way, there is no, and you would agree, with all due respect to our brothers and sisters who are Jews or Lutherans or Baptists, there ain't nothing like Roman Catholics. It's an army. It's a, and also, not to be parenthetically abstruse, but the Jesuits are, of which I went to a Jesuit high school, and that's all I know, from Ignatius Loyola and Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam and the Society of Jesus, and that is something which is another story. Black popes, and it is so. If you love, I don't want to keep saying Harry Potter, but Byzantine, mysterious storylines, it doesn't get better than this. There's nothing like it. Nothing.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction. Well, I find anyway.
So another question, Erik. And by the way, dear friend, thank you for this. Thank you. Is there any question or any suspicions as to the cause, if you will, of the death of Bergoglio? Anybody was that a clean death, as we say?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think there's any funny business there. There were a lot of theories and speculations going around, in the months prior.
If you had to handicap, if you were a betting man, is it even possible? When I see CBS Morning News or somebody saying, who's likely to be, you don't know anything about, there seems to be an unusual number of, again, as a layman, African, Black, non-traditional, non-European, non-Italian. How is that met by more of the traditional folks? And if you had to pick who would be the next pope, and you were a betting man, what's the inside skinny? What does the inside line say?
I mean, in fact, I have a friend here in Rome. He's Irish. He sent me the betting,
yeah, right,
like Paddy Power, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, just yesterday. The big front runners are two I mentioned last time. Turkson from Africa, he's from Ghana. Tagle from the Philippines. They're both, he's the second youngest cardinal period, and they're both legitimate pre-2013.
Okay, good.
But they're both very, people would characterize them as being progressive, liberal, that kind of thing, among other things. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
The other big front runners are the Secretary of State, Parolin, who just got really ill the other day. There is an American, but he's not a sitting ordinary bishop in the States. He's actually in the Curia here in Rome. His last name is, oh gosh, it's slipping my mind right now. There were a few days where O'Malley's name where was O'Malley in Boston? Yeah. O'Malley's name and Dolan's name were being.
There's no way they're going to pick an American. There's no way. Is that true?
I have a theory that could be very weird, but would still not solve the issue. But because of the geopolitics involved, I started wondering about it, and I could see where that could make sense, given what's happening on the world geopolitically now. But still, I don't really think it's Mm,
There
I don't
is
think
a
so.
there is a meme, kind of this mimetic that's being uh, published, and
Mhm.
it's smoke of the rainbow color, meaning they're laughing that the next pope is going to be another progressive.
Well,
We're going
yeah,
to
yeah.
see nuns as
That's
priests. It's going to
oh
be a
yeah,
complete and total. What's
yeah,
what's your take on that?
probably.
Oh no, where is
Yeah.
this coming from? Who is behind? Oh, and one more thing. One more thing. Did you ever hear the story? And I've heard this just maybe as a drive-by. I'm hearing this that Bergoglio Francis every day called up the pastor or a priest of a
In Gaza.
Catholic church in Gaza,
Yeah.
which infuriated Israeli officials, and there was some kind of a. Have you heard about that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's true.
What's the story behind that, and how does the and also the Bergoglio's past in juntas and death
Mm.
squads and living. Listen, J.P. Deuce Wojtyła, when he was a young man, this guy, he had girlfriends. He was an actor. He probably killed people. This dude was not some monastic choir boy, from what I understand, which might be kind of good. But how much of that affected Francis, and what's the relationship between the papacy and Israel, Middle East, Gaza, Palestinians, as far as you know?
Very tense. No, from what I understand, Israel itself forbade
Mm.
any diplomats or representatives from coming to Bergoglio's funeral.
Wow.
Mm. Um, also people which is obviously a whole other issue, even though it is related, but
Right.
what's happening in Palestine,
Right.
Israel, God,
Right.
everybody thinks they're just a bunch of nutty, well, I shouldn't say nutty. They're just, Muslim Arabs. No, there's Christians there as well. Um,
Because
so,
Christians are under attack.
mm,
Christians around the world. This is serious business. I mean, not just necessarily in the quote. Middle East has become kind of a code word for
right.
Israel or Palestine or whatever you want to call it. But Christians. Now
Hmm.
remember, the papacy deals not exclusively with Catholics, though that is certainly a great force of interest, but the notion of Christians under attack, there's a very serious undercurrent of problems here that the Pope or the papacy should or maybe have attempted to address. Have you heard anything along those lines?
Yeah, well, you can bring China into the mix because this is another big issue. Um, just within a couple of years after Bergoglio was elected, installed, um, he sent. So you asked also kind of going back to what are some of the motivations or the factors that led to all this in the first place. So we mentioned the Sankt Gallen group before,
Mm-hmm. Yep, the
spe-
mafia.
specifically the now deceased Cardinal McCarrick,
Yep, yep.
and Bergoglio made McCarrick his liaison uh, back and forth between the Vatican and the CCP to strike a new treaty with the CCP, which has never, ever been made public, which is another big problem. No one
Problem
knows
how? How because it hasn't been made problem. What's the problem per se?
that no one knows what's involved. No one knows what it's about.
But isn't that good
Um,
that they're speaking? Isn't that good that there's
sure, sure, of course. But the problem is number one, and it was renewed in 2018. So I think that's 4, 5, 6 years after the first treaty was ratified between the two. But again, not actually because it's null and void, but whatever.
Mhm.
It was renewed again in 2018. Um, and so precisely because the contents have not been made public. Imagine the I don't know, the president of the United States signing a treaty with China, and they just say, "Don't worry about it. We're not going to publish it. We're not going to make it public." but we'll take care of it.
But it's
Take care of
well, it's
what?
almost like Nancy Pelosi, who said we don't know what we signed until we passed the law.
Ah,
Now, let me ask you another stupid, simple question. Out of this entire, there is a Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, claims to be a Catholic and has always been very, very strong. He said that
It was Russian Orthodox. It was Russian Orthodox.
now that's the question. They said that when he was in the KGB or FSB, he put his badge away. He accepted. He was very devout. The West, we say, oh no, even Catholic, no, don't believe that for a moment. I've never heard how a lot of people can look into the heart of somebody and determine the legitimacy of their transformation. What is Eastern Rite? Eastern, what does that mean?
Orthodoxy.
Yeah, compared to plain old Catholic, what does it mean?
I mean, it's basically the same thing. With the trappings are slightly different. The liturgy is slightly different. The language is different.
Does the Pope preside?
You mean the Pope in Rome?
Yeah.
Well, it's a political. Over the centuries, theologians and historians, it's been a beef using theology somehow to justify all this, and they can't. It's all political, and it goes all the way back to the 4th century when Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Byzantium, which he named Nova Roma, New Rome, because it has to reflect Rome. After his death, it was ever after remembered as Constantinople, the city of Constantine, now Istanbul. And so it goes all the way back to then. It was a fight, a battle between Constantinople as the new capital and Rome. And all sorts of theological justifications, ecclesiological justifications have been attempted ever since. None of it works. It's very.
Are they correct? Because we have, of course, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Eastern, Armenian. We have all of these. When I was in Jerusalem in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is as holy as you can get, the individuals, there was something called the status quo. It was an understanding of who ran the concession, because it was not only the site of Christ's crucifixion, but his burial, his tomb, where the rock was. And I saw people with beards and not cassocks, but vestments and hats. I'm thinking, who are these? I never knew the flavors and
it's a sight to behold.
Oh,
it's a sight to behold.
Yeah. What's interesting also, you'll get a kick out of this, when the Protestants said, hey, listen, can we get in on this? They said, excuse me?
Yeah.
They said, no. And they came up with Calvary, not Gethsemane or whatever. I don't know. But they came up with their own version of it, because you have the Coptics have the concession for this one's got that. And it's almost like I don't mean to be, it's almost like a food court. You have different food over here. And really, and you have people running the show. And it is, as a person who was a retired Catholic and not in any way spiritual, there was an energy in that place. Maybe
feel it.
reflected from the hearts and souls and of other people. But it was something that I shan't forget. But is it safe to say that Vladimir Putin is a Catholic?
Well, he's Russian Orthodox. So in other words, the problem. So there's been 2 schisms, ruptures within the one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. The first was in the year 1054, when the Pope at the time sent his ambassador, the French Cardinal Humbert, sounds better in French, to Constantinople to issue a papal bull of excommunication against the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Emperor of Constantinople, because of an issue regarding what's called the Filioque clause. So Catholics who practice or whatever, when you recite the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, you come to a certain part, we believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son. Well, that was never in the original ecumenical council, the First Council of Constantinople in 381. that issued that proclamation. It just said ex patria, or from the Father, out of the Father. And the Son part was added. Now, it's a logical consequence. Theologically, there's not. It's a fact. I mean, in this
Right.
internal labyrinth of theology. But it was then weaponized politically. It was politicized regarding the political struggle back and forth between Rome and Constantinople, so that everything came to a head in 1054 when this Cardinal Humbert, with the papal bull of excommunication, marches into Hagia Sophia on Easter Sunday while the patriarch's about to consecrate the Eucharist at the
Wow.
Mass, okay? And he slams on the altar the papal bull of excommunication. And the patriarch immediately, it was kind of like an F me, F you moment.
Yeah, right.
The patriarch issues verbally, publicly, in front of everyone, Hagia Sophia Cathedral in Istanbul, Constantinople. We call it a double excommunication. And they immediately justified, both sides agreed to immediately pretend like, well, that never happened. Why? Well, because unbeknownst to Cardinal Humbert, it took him 2 weeks on a boat to get from Rome to Constantinople. And in the meantime, the Pope died. Here we are. Remember that? Say, the bull of excommunication he was bringing was null and void.
Right.
On the patriarch's part, they said they excommunicated the Western Church, meaning the Roman Latin Church, just the Cardinal Humbert, his entourage, and the Pope, who was dead. So, they canceled each other out. But on a grassroots level, it was too little, too late. Sorry about that.
There's a couple of things here. Just in terms of the trivia and the specifics. When I was in Catholic school, we did the sign of the cross like this, to the left and to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Putin and Eastern will do it the other way, right to left. That's one thing, which is no big deal. That's like sometimes a friend of mine who is a Muslim, I said, what's the difference between Shia and Sunnis? He said, this or this or this. Anyway, it was something with a hand. It was a kind of an inside joke. I didn't get it. That's number one. Number two, when you talk about Protestants, because I love to ask Protestants, what is it between you and a Catholic? What's really the difference? And they can't answer the question. And a friend of mine, one time we were at I've told you this, we were at a wake of a friend of mine in a Catholic church, and my friend who's Jewish said, I've never been in a church before. I said, let me show you something. I said, you know how you can tell if you're in a Catholic church? Look at the altar. You see that cross? If Jesus is on it, it's Catholic. It's a crucifix. If Jesus is off, it's Protestant. Because Protestants emphasize the resurrection. Catholics not focus on, but it's the passion of Jesus the Christ. Stations of the Cross. Different emphasis. Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, or as my friend calls it, Good Friday the 13th, because it was like a snuff film in terms of the horror. This is also to Mel Gibson's own mind. He devoted maybe 10 seconds to the resurrection. The focus was on the passion. Now, that is an extremely crude version. But even and one more thing. Mel Gibson's father, Hutton, who's an Orthodox Catholic, not hated Vatican II, loathed it, and I think it was Roncalli, 23rd, who removed the perfidy of the Jew or something from the Easter, because they had their, quote, anti-Semitism was, from their point of view, it was the Jews, it was they were those who fomented the requirement of or the demand for the crucifixion, versus Pilate, who did it himself, who was told he was basically a governor. Now, I just threw 50 facts at you, all of them wrong, stitched together so stupidly. But don't you find the little nuances huge in terms of what makes one sect what it is and the others not?
Yeah, sure. I would say between most Protestants. Did I lose the volume? Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah.
If I hear you.
Okay.
Sound great.
The specifically to that, the Passion of the Christ, the emphasis on the crucifix. It has to do, and Michelangelo captures this in the altarpiece in the Sistine Chapel, talking about the conclave to elect the Pope, the Last Judgment scene. um, visually responding to. So he's painted this just a couple of decades after Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses in 1517. So he's having to respond to the two pillars of what become referred to as the two pillars of Protestant: sola fide, sola scriptura. The second one, sola scriptura, by scripture alone. The previous one, sola fide. All you have to do is say, I believe that, Jesus, you're my Lord and Savior, and you're saved. Well, the Catholic Church's response was, that's kind of a no duh position.
Yeah.
That's like, and
Yeah.
you just keep it there, or you're going to take the ball and run with it then. So the idea is that if one wishes to share in the resurrection of Christ, as a disciple, one must share in the life of Christ, which includes ultimately suffering and death. And so that
Precisely. And you aren't necessarily guaranteed. It's funny how sometimes Protestants will laugh that the Catholics can just go in for confession or reconciliation, whatever it's called now, and then that's it.
mm-hmm.
To which I respond, well, you think that all you have to do is be saved. Catholics say that's part of it. Your life, the addition of Saint Peter, are you worthy? They don't have the notion of purgatory. They don't recognize Mary. They don't recognize. I believe that for you to understand the differences in the faith actually concretizes your faith even better, because you have to know what you believe in. You just can't say, it's not like being a Yankees fan. All you got to do is buy a ticket, show up, and know when to root. It's not like that. For you to connect yourself. And if those watching, and I forgot to say this, Professor Walters here gives the most exquisite tours of the Vatican. His organization, his site, Vatiland, which we will have here, is, look at what he knows. Have you ever said in your life, I don't know, beats the hell out of me, I don't know? You've never shown either that or you're just making it up, which I kid, of course. I know you're not. But your encyclopedic knowledge of this, is this part of your academia, your academic studies, your academe? Is it, or is it something else? How do you know all
No,
of
it's pretty well. I have no life.
this? You should be a cardinal.
Yeah.
You'd be good.
It's just a lifetime. I take a cue from Socrates. The better the teacher, the better the student. You never stop being a student. You never stop learning. You never stop wanting to learn. You never stop humbly admitting when you're in error, inaccurate, imprecise, and trying to be more so. And it's a constant process. So
I think, though, the thing that is the most important is that, look at all of the rules. I always go back to this hypothetical of somebody from another planet who comes here, and I'm saying, listen to this man. There are scholars, just like in the yeshivas, and there are Jewish scholars study the Talmud and the Torah, and they spend their lives dissecting questions and hypotheticals. The amount of lore, doctrinal history is mind-boggling in terms of just the Catholic Church. And yet, just like in our case, it's amazing what you can get away with. Think about assassinations, think about coup d'etats, stolen elections, whatever your particular affiliation is.
Yeah.
We believe that whenever there is some type of a blatant error, that somebody rings a bell and it's stopped, that there's some internal dead man switch that says, oh, no, you don't. You can't do this. Surely somebody is going to find out and complain and call the papers. They know nothing about it because they're lulled into this complacency.
It's a 5-alarm fire here in Italy. Again, Chonchi, who might be helpful if you want. I know he'll be fine with it. He has a lot of, why reinvent the wheel? He has a lot of good in English, little mini videos. There's 3 in particular. I can send them if you want. Maybe you want to attach them to the bottom of this. Just explaining a lot of graphics, so it's very visually helpful for people because it's a lot to wrap your mind around, I realize. So that might be helpful. But there's a 5-alarm fire. I mean, everybody's kind of panicking and really worried, those who existentially care about this stuff, here in Italy, as we ramp up to Wednesday. and it's not the end of everything, but it's kind of like, can there be a comeback? And I'm going to wait. I was gonna do it now, maybe like to drop a last final bomb. I'm not. Let's wait and see what happens,
Okay.
and then whatever does happen, I'll give you an update and
Oh, please.
where things now would stand at that point. Yeah,
Would
because we
it
don't know
be
what's going on.
would it be impertinent of me to ask you, are you a Catholic yourself?
I was baptized in Roman Catholic.
Okay. That's all. I'm just curious because
Mm,
it would be for me, for example, if I were to be some expert of, let's say, Jewish lore,
mhm,
or, somebody says, well, are you Jewish? No. But then
mhm.
again, you don't have to be a woman to be a gynecologist. That's a bad example. But I'm just curious because I have respect for, I mean, if I can study the history of France and live in this country, it's the study, it's the
Right,
naked study of the history, which is so fascinating to me.
right.
What is your expertise? You are a professor. What do you teach?
Well, I've taught the courses over the 15 years. I've taught Latin. I've taught ancient Roman history, comparative world religions, courses in the New Testament. But over the past several years, two courses in particular have become very popular. One is called The Popes of Rome, History of the Catholic Church, and the other is called Mystics, Saints, and Sinners, Studied in Medieval Catholic Theology. So, my I mentioned last time my CV. So if your audience didn't watch that previous interview, they can go back at the beginning where you asked me about my CV.
Right.
Um, within all of that, my PhD thesis was in something called, well, philology, but
Right.
the theological aspect is called something called ecclesiology, which is the logical rational principle of this thing we call the church, the structure of the church, its governance, its formation, its grassroots, everything. So,
And
yeah.
philology is almost like a love of
uh,
knowledge, or
an intimate love of logical rational principles communicated via words. In other words, what does a word really mean?
why is Latin important? Why would you
Um,
advocate learning it? What does it do?
Yeah, both Latin and Greek, but just for Latin's sake. I mean, number one, it's what every modern Romance language, but also English, which is now the, ironically, lingua franca of the world,
Mhm.
is based on. It's what allows English to be, in my opinion, the premier language to communicate in the world, phonetic alphabetized language, because it has a vast, vast vocabulary. Um, and the study of Latin, number one, it disciplines the mind to think critically, logically, rationally.
Mhm.
Just the going about learning it. And number two, it suddenly opens up. Once you understand what a word really means, it completely opens up your horizon and makes you understand things in a very different light. And yeah,
When I went to a Jesuit high school, I took Latin, and
mm,
I found out a number of things. First, it was to me the ultimate fu to my friends with their Spanish and French. I don't need this because
yeah,
everybody else. That's number one. Because we also thought we were just different.
right,
There is a sound to it. There's
mm,
something. It sounds almost,
yeah,
everything sounds profound. And the
yeah,
Catalan orations, quousque tandem abutere Catalina patientia nostra. How long are we going to put up with it? But it was profound. The Pledge of Allegiance, ego vexillo, uni torbido. Notice I say vexillo, not vexillo. I speak
mm,
classical Latin, not that churchy. Whatever.
sure.
What's your phrase for church
It's
Latin? What is it called?
spaghetti
Spaghetti
Latin.
Latin. Spaghetti Latin. Yeah. And also, I know most people get who and whom incorrect. This
Mm,
teaches you when you talk about
yeah,
pluperfect
grammar.
tense, yes, grammar, in
Yeah,
order for you to speak, and when you speak any language where the adjective comes after. You go through the
mm,
sentence, and then at the end, it's like, let me get all
right,
this stuff out of the way, and now I'll worry about the descriptive,
right.
the dative case, and uh, 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 sum sum sum, huyus, conjugation of verbs, and aside from that, I loved it.
Yeah,
I never, ever, ever. And you don't have to necessarily know something to open up your mind and to stretch it. I always give the analogy of somebody who's about to run will put themselves into
mhm,
contortions that they will never mimic or replicate during the
right.
run, but being able to. So
Yeah,
Latin is just
Yeah.
it's well worth the effort as far as I'm concerned. Maybe I'm biased.
Right. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. That's my doctoral research was on the uh, what we call well, just an analysis of one word in Latin from the first time it appears in the Latin language until the time of Constantine, the word being unitas, meaning oneness. This is how the ecclesiology, the structure of the church, comes into play, as well as the Trinitarian theology, all sorts of stuff. It's like it's useless to mow the lawn. You want to uproot the weeds, and so that's also part of my approach.
What also, last question, what is the state, the shape, the attitude of Rome, to live in Rome, uh based upon what you've seen, the crime, immigration, the
Mm,
attitude, the flavor? What's Rome like now?
I
When
mean,
in Rome?
yeah, correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but
Right,
and it's
right.
not it's not just me. A lot of friends and colleagues, peers, acquaintances. Strangely enough, since 2013 and very recently now, I don't like the feel.
Hmm.
Mm,
Isn't it something how the derivative effects of something seemingly,
yeah,
it's the old butterfly wings,
yeah,
and how something seemingly disconnected can trickle down, to use a
yeah,
Reagan term, I guess, into effect. I feel exactly the same way. We have a thing here in New York, this notion Rudy Giuliani provided, or made it popular, was it's the broken windows effect, where
mm,
Wilson and whatever had this idea that if you have a neighborhood where there's always this one storefront with a broken window and it's never fixed, it gives
mhm.
people the impression people don't care about it.
Yes,
Whereas you
that's
go after little pieces of crime and little pieces, and it shows people they mean business. So little things,
that's
when you
100%
see,
applicable to
right there,
Rome.
right. What about the notion of heterogeneity? Heterogeneity, and some people are suggesting that when you have influxes, and they always focus sometimes on African. I think there might be. I don't want to use the word racist, but put it this way: other non-Roman white Europeans don't
Yeah,
catch your attention. But what happens when a culture, perhaps by virtue of dilution, or I'm not going to use words like contamination, but what happens when the Roman culture and the Italian culture and the way of life, and when it is affected by influxes of
it's
non-Roman people?
there's a point where you reach what would you call it, supersaturation, oversaturation levels,
Mhm. Yeah.
and maybe it can be repaired, maybe not. So that's where we're at here.
Well, Erik Thaddeus Walters, Professor Erik Thaddeus Walters, I will have everything in the description portion, up to and including the link from last time. I will put your
Sure.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And if somebody wanted to enlist your services for Vatican to get a, because you are, make people understand this, you're just not some dude with a little sign that says tours. You are
Right.
certified. You are, explain your bona fides when it comes to giving
Yeah. Well, again,
tours and
going
all
back,
that.
yeah. When you asked me about just how do I have all this knowledge and stuff, and it's number one, I never stopped learning and studying, doing my own research, continued research, trying to publish stuff. And Number two, just because of all of that, the amalgamation over time of both doing it simultaneously while I'm a postgraduate student, and it just kind of snowballs forward and never ends. It's just that's so you know Vatican
But
Blue Guide
you
does.
but you are also given some kind of a distinction, are you not? You have some type of
Yeah, that
uh
Vatican Blue Guide does. So there's thousands and thousands of guides all over Italy. Here in Rome, there's at least a few thousand legitimately licensed guides because here that's a big deal. You have to, if you want to do it and not have
right.
problems, you have to be licensed somehow. You can be licensed by a province, meaning like a county or a city or something like that, In this case, it's the Vatican itself. Vatican Blue Guide docent. In Italian, it's called operatore didattico, or didactic operator, but it sounds more clear and clear.
So you are a 5-star.
I'm not the only one, but yeah.
Still, the 5-star, platinum, diamond, gold. Last question. As you can tell, I'm a perennial liar. I always say last question for about 5 or 6 times. Are you ever going to come back to are you permanently, or do you consider yourself a Roman, an expat? Where do you fit into this weird world that we live in?
I think I'm a stranger in a strange land wherever I go. I mean, Rome really is home. Last time I was physically back, set foot in the States, was 8 years ago, and that was for 5 days. And the time before that was 11 years earlier, so I don't get back much.
No. And you couldn't wait to get back as soon as when you first.
Well, people used to ask me, what do you miss from the States? And I said, Popeyes. And then the last time I went back, I had a layover in the Detroit airport. And I was in the international terminal, so I said, "Oh, there's a Popeyes. Let's try that out." And it was not as I remembered, so I was disappointed.
The dirty rice just kind of loses its panache. I also love to, if ever I have never had the pleasure, and if Mrs. Eld and I go there, I'm going to call you up whether you like it or not. But I would always want to say, let me see Rome the way you see it. Yeah. I don't want to don't forget the beaten path.
A lot of my friends, meaning Roman, friends, I know Rome better than most of them. Like, they ask me about, whatever directions or how to do that,
And I also want to find out things that drive you crazy, like cheese on fish and other. We'll talk about that some other day.
Right.
Professor Erik Thaddeus Walters. Again, I will have all of your CV, your bona fides in the list. Let us talk again after the other shoe or
drops.
Shoe drops. Right. And again, I want to thank you for your wisdom and your genius and your absolute encyclopedic knowledge. You have made this so incredibly important. Thank you so much, my friend.
Sure. Thank you. All right. A presto.
Thank you, sir.